Welcome to this workshop covering some tips and tricks for how to use FultonHistory.com, with particular focus on searching and accessing Cortland County newspapers. My name is Sophie, and I am the Collections and Research Assistant at Cortland County Historical Society. Fulton History is one of my favorite tools for research, and I hope I can provide a bit of guidance on how to use this invaluable resource. In this workshop, I will first tell you a little bit about Fulton History, provide the basics for how to get started using the site, go over some tips for better searching, along with some examples. Fulton History is run by Tom Triniski out of his home in Fulton, New York. It is one of the largest historic newspaper databases, running even larger than the Library of Congress newspaper site. It is free to use, although he accepts donations to help cover costs for bandwidth and hard drives. In terms of Cortland County newspapers, in 2013, CCHS supplied Tom with about 200 microfilm reels to be digitized and provided online. These start about 1813 to 1814 with the Cortland Repository paper and go all the way up into the 1970s with some 1980s editions of the Independent Villager. From the home screen, there are two ways to access the newspapers. The first is to use Go and Search My Archives. With this option, you are able to search through the newspapers for the names and topics of your choice. The second option is to use Go and Browse My Archives. Through this option, you have access to specific newspapers and can browse through them in near chronological order. This is what the screen will look like if you select the first option to go and search my archives. When doing a search for the first time, it can feel very overwhelming to see all these different options. To start with, I recommend having all of the words in the drop-down menu selected. And there is no need to select anything else at this time. My number one tip that can really make a huge difference in searches is to remember to put names and series of words in quotes. I also recommend adding additional terms like place names to help narrow your searches down to a specific region. It's also important to consider alternate spellings. This includes either including a middle initial or putting both first and middle initial instead of full names. Let's take a look at one of our results. Once it loads, you will see that your search terms are highlighted in different colors. The plus and minus buttons at the top allow you to zoom in and out on the screen. There are icons on the right for either printing or saving the full page. When you select to either print or save, please know that this will be for the full page of the newspaper. If you want the zoomed in portion, or you just want a clipping, you'll have to use a separate software or screenshot. On Windows, you can use the snipping tool to snip the clipping that you would like. Let's take a look at another example. I was given a request to do some research on Rebecca Hyde. She was the wife of David C. Reed, lived in Hartford in Cortland County, and was born about 1838. Here are some of the different searches that I could try, each likely to come up with different kinds of results. Rebecca Hyde Reed, all in quotes, could be one that might pull up an obituary where she is listed with both her maiden and married names. The second search, Rebecca Hyde in quotes with Reed and Cortland as other terms to search for, could be a good one when looking for a marriage announcement. She, of course, may just come up as Rebecca Reed. And since men are often the ones to be included in newspapers, or she could come up as a Mrs. David Reed, it doesn't hurt to also try under her husband's name. There's also an example where we could use his middle initial. I'm going to start with a search here with the name Rebecca Hyde Reed, using both her maiden and married name. Often this can pull up an obituary, but in this case it didn't pull up anything. So next we're going to try Rebecca Hyde in quotes and Reed, and of course the additional term Cortland. My hope with a search like this is often to bring up a marriage announcement. But we only had 2 results here, the second one of which just kind of seemed potentially promising just to try and look, but nothing good. So now let's try Rebecca Reed in quotes and Cortland. With this search, we have over 1,000 results, so that's a lot. And scrolling through just some of the first ones here, they're all from the Syracuse Post Standard. So I can do a better search, something that will give me just some better results. So I'm actually going to try her husband's name, David C. Reed. It's promising because he has a middle initial, which can help us narrow our results. So let's just take a look at some of these. And usually I can just even tell just by looking whether it's going to be an article that's of any use. So David C. Reed of Slaterville visited. So we're getting some of the just social kind of articles. Let's try adding Mrs. in front. All right, so 29 results, and clicking through a few of these, a lot of these are going to be more of those social announcements. Some of her friends held a party. They had guests. So a lot of these can be fun and interesting little tidbits. They're not going to be the kind of thing that have your vital information that you might be looking for. But 29 results is not all that many. So you should be able to kind of click through these and maybe find some interesting pieces. Another search request that I received was for Austin Dexter, who died in Cortland on April 10th, 1879. We know he was born in Connecticut and that at some point he lived in Marcellus in Onondaga County. So some of the potential searches that I can try would be the name Austin Dexter in quotes and add Cortland. I can do Austin Dexter in quotes again, but this time with Marcellus as my modifying term. I can also consider alternate spellings of Austin with an E instead of an I, you never know, and other similar searches. So let's try that first search, Austin Dexter and Cortland. 5 results. This first one is from the Cortland Standard. It took me a minute to see where it was exactly, but here he is listed in this role of some kind. And then all the other results, none of them are really from the Cortland papers, so none of them really kind of seemed promising. So let's try search for his name with Marcellus as our modifying term. So the first result here, and there's only 3 results to take a look at, looks like he's put an ad in. A man, horse, wagon, or sleigh to peddle wooden wares. So it looks like he's trying to close his business potentially. Another result here, selling land. So maybe he's making his way, getting ready to move to Cortland. And the last result here is from a paper not in the area and 1980 result, so a little later than what we'd be looking for. So I didn't even click on that one. So here's another trick. There's not really a great way of trying to search for a specific date. What you can do is try to find a result that is dated somewhere near the specific date that you are looking for. So we know for Austin Dexter that he died on April 10th, 1879. So I'm really curious to try to find an obituary or at least a death notice for him confirming this. So I found a result for Cortland Standard happening in the years 1877 to 1879, and that 4-digit number, think of that as a page number. So the particular result that I had was later than the date I was looking for, so I could try changing that 4-digit number to move forward or backward and try to zero in on the specific date that I'm looking for. So in this example, I did end up choosing actually a Cortland Democrat paper to look for instead. So I clicked on a link there for the Cortland Democrat, and saw that this was February of 1878. So I'm going to copy that file name, put it in our search, and change the page number to 1000 and see where that takes us. I click on that result, and we are in August of 1878. So remember, we're trying to get to April of 1879. So added another 500 pages to that. January of 1879. So let's go forward another 30 pages, which takes us to March. And another 15 pages forward, we are now on April 4th. So we're trying to get to April 10th or some date after that. And here we are on April 11th. Now, I probably should have looked through some previous pages to this April 11th paper, but instead I decided to move to the next page, which you'll see here in just a moment. Here I am just trying to see if I can find any death announcements on that page. So I move forward one page, which takes us to April 18th. So that's presumably a little more than a week after the death of Austin Dexter. So this is the first page, again, just looking around for those death notices, and I don't see them here, so I move on to the next page. And there's a lot to look through here. All these advertisements kind of make it hard, but the death announcements do actually show up on this page, kind of in the middle towards the top there. You can see where it says died. And on the next slide, I do actually show a zoomed in portion of this. And if we zoom in on those death announcements, we see that we do not have any Dexters. So I was able to get around to the right dates, but not find a death announcement for Austin Dexter. So I haven't given up on trying to find a death announcement for Austin Dexter, but actually I ended up finding out from a descendant that when Austin passed away, there was an error in his death announcement, and that was to put it under the name of his brother, Ira. So I'm going to try a different kind of search. I'm going to search for Ira Dexter and see if that obit doesn't come up. But we're going to use a Boolean search instead of, under that drop-down menu, we have all of the words selected. We now want to change that to Boolean search. And if you use this phrase, file name contains Cortland, you will be able to narrow down your results to only newspapers that have the name Cortland in the title. One of the key differences when doing a Boolean search is the way that we develop our search phrase. In between the different terms, we now have to add this and in between. So you'll see in the video that I first start with Ira Dexter in quotes and file name contains Cortland. But I had over 300 results, a lot of which were for all kinds of different years. So I decided to try to narrow it down and add in an additional phrase, file name contains 1879, to get those newspaper results that have file names that contain that 1879 year in there. It did kind of take a long time to pull up results. Of course, the more kind of modifications you add, the longer the system kind of has to think. But you ultimately save time because fairly quickly here, I only had 5 results this time, and fairly quickly I see one that looks promising, looks like a death announcement format. So let's take a look at that one. Dexter at the Dexter house in Cortland, New York, Mr. Ira Dexter, but it was in fact not Ira Dexter that passed away, it was Austin Dexter. Another search request that I received was for the name Frank Casey. I wasn't really given any additional information about Frank, or really what kind of information the researcher was hoping to find. And you'll see in the next slide that I find many mentions of Mr. and Mrs. Frank Casey in Society News, and based off of these results, I could determine that they lived in Messengerville, and that they made many visits to Fulton to call on family. So I did a search for Frank Casey in quotes, and then this is a Boolean search, so I added and file name contains Cortland to narrow down what results I got. So first result here, it's going to be one of these society announcements. Kind of over off to the right there, they had some guests over for New Year's. And we see them listed under as Messengerville. Next result, again, we can kind of get a hint there. Guests of Mr. and Mrs. Frank Casey Sunday were Mr. and Mrs. Fred Casey. Next one, same kind of thing. Mr. Frank Casey and his son were in Cortland. So we just get to see all their moving abouts. We also do actually happen to come across the death announcement of one of their sons who died from illness. So it's up on the right there. Here's another general request that I received for the Ungeviter family. So once again, I didn't have particular names or what kind of information they're hoping to find, so I'm just going to do a general search for the family name, which is a unique one, and file name contains Cortland. So this first result here, the name just appears in this legal notices list. So I'll try a different result. Here's one with the name Miss Inga, who was crowned the Dairy Princess in 1964. So that's a fun find. We try a different one. Oh, Miss Inga shows up again. This time with her wedding. Ingeborg Martha, so she has a longer name it looks like, but she shows up in this clipping about from when she was in high school. And once again, this is reminiscing about the time when she was crowned Dairy Princess. So we have lots of results to kind of work with, and once we kind of decide a particular name, we could try looking up Inga and see results only with her name, or if we knew of other names, we could try those as well. So let's take a look at another example, this time Elizabeth Fosgate White. I was given a range of years that she was born 1903, died 1929. That is relatively early, so I wouldn't be surprised if I'm able to find an obituary or death announcement for her. That first result looks like she won some awards for school examinations. And a lot of these mentions are going to be a lot of the society mentions, places that she's visited. Again, we tend to be able to place her in Brackle, because she does show up a lot under the Brackle headline. So again, just kind of quickly clicking through some of these. A lot of them are just society mentions. Do see in this next one that she's on the sick list, 1909. She would have been about 6 years old. Let's see places that she's working, helping out at people's homes. Some of the highlights that I was able to come across, so a few society news pieces did mention her with Leon White, which I would imagine could be her future husband. And another kind of a little interesting thing, Elizabeth Fosgate's big dog killed a woodchuck before the snow began to go. So since I got that Leon White name, I decided to try a search for his name, in quotes, Leon White, and then add Fosgate thinking that I should be able to come up with probably their wedding announcement. And I did add that file name contains Cortland just because it does help zero in on more relevant results. So what I did end up coming across, unfortunately, was the death announcement for Elizabeth here. And in that previous result, we saw that she had died from burns that she had got from a fire. So I figured there had to have been an article that went, described what might have actually happened. And so I tried a different search, Leon White and fire, and the year that it happened, 1929. And once again, that file name contains Cortland. And I was able to find an article of this terrible event that unfortunately led to her death. Another request that I received involving an accident was for Hiram Scranton, who the researcher knew had been involved in an accident between a taxi and a train that had happened in the 1940s. So, like I like to do, I usually just start with a general search with just the name in quotes, Hiram Scranton, and file name contains Cortland. So let's take a look at some of the results that I got from this search. So the first one, article, something about he's a leader to boys. Something relating to school. I believe this is another one. 20 children in her first grade. So these are all results in the 40s. I'm getting a little too broad of hits. So let's try adding the term taxi. Oh, and we get one result. Let's hope it's good. Car hits train, 4 persons hurt. And so we get the article describing that particular event. So in the information science world, there's a technique called berry picking, which is kind of like a hunt for clues. So I received a request that this particular researcher was interested in the centralization of the Marathon Central School District. And this one can be kind of tricky because you don't really know what kind of terms might be used. So I have to try a couple of different methods and see what I can find, and based on results that I see, tweak my phrasing and see if I can pull up even more relevant results. So I do have an article here which will appear again in the next slide, talking about the building of a new school, the Marathon Central School. So we'll kind of see here, there are a lot of results, and what I'm looking for are the earliest results that I can find, because presumably the Marathon Central School District name wouldn't appear until the district was centralized. So we're going to try to find the earliest example of that. And I did get fortunate. I did find this article with the central project to be discussed. So 1930, it looks, is about when the centralization was starting to occur. So I tried a different search this time, Marathon and centralize and file name contains Cortland. And even though this kind of search could potentially be too broad, I was actually able to pull up a very good result for this article that the largest central area in the state will be organized at Marathon, with a lot of good detailed information. So here was a bit of a unique request, something I'd never heard of, the League of American Wheelmen. So I tried to search just for that name, just to see what came up. And what I got was a lot of results from all over the state, which means I needed to narrow my result by adding that modifier, and file name contains Cortland. So we still get a number of results here. So the first one, talking about a meeting, and this particular article helped me find out what the league was about. Matters affecting the general interest and advancement of cycling, agitating for good roads, that kind of thing. So these had to do with bicycling. Here's another article. Again, just general about a parade that occurred. Wheelman at Washington, so there were some events going on. They get relatively big articles in here, so for something I'd never heard of, there's quite a few results. Just to show a couple of highlights. So this article is particularly of local interest. Mr. Charles H. Daines of the Homer Republican is taking names for membership to the League of American Wheelmen. It shows us some information regarding the cost and benefits of membership. This particular article is about Ralph D. Webster, who was a former resident of Cortland, and involved in the League of American Wheelmen. It appears by 1902 that the League was already starting to diminish, and there were efforts to restore it back to its former place of esteem. And what is kind of interesting to notice in this article is the mention of the motor bicycle now furnishes a link between the wheel and the automobile. So it looks like maybe there was effort to kind of include motorcycles in the League of American Wheelmen. Just out of curiosity, after kind of seeing these articles about the League of Wheelmen, I became interested in just bicycling in general, the history of bicycling in Cortland. So we know that bicycling really started to become popular in the 1890s. And so, of course, there would be informative articles still coming out about bicycling. Looks like 1896 was deemed the bicycling year, or perhaps 1895, since this article is from January of 1896. And not everyone approved of bicycling. As we'll see, particularly in the next one that I click on, this one's about ex-President Harrison, his views, but this one is an abstract of a sermon given at the First Methodist Episcopal Church, and pretty much describes bicycling as kind of an evil. It was keeping young people away from church, and this particular preacher thought people looked kind of gangly and sprawling on the bicycle. So this is kind of a fun find. I also found some articles about bicycle races. So this is 1892, 4th of July. Let me get this moving. So yeah, Glorious 4th included bicycle races and had a nice long write-up on the bicycle race event. So just to go over a few more things regarding using Fulton History. So back at the main menu, there's the Go and Browse My Archives, and this is a way where you can browse by newspaper. Unfortunately, for some reason, it has not worked for me in some time. I don't know if it's an issue on my end or whether this is just not available, but you would be able, should it work, you would be able to find files in alphabetical order. So if you go for looking in the C's for Cortland, you'd be able to find Cortland standards. And this would be another potential method of trying to look for an article by date. So rather than that trick that I showed earlier of changing the page number, you would be able to go directly into the file and kind of click around looking for the pages that you're looking for. I'd also like to point out that the Cortland Free Library is working on digitizing their microfilm. So right on their homepage, there's this Historic Newspapers Online link that they have up. If you click on that, you are able to see the newspapers that they have available and for what years that they have digitized. I have attempted some searches on here. I still personally currently like Fulton History. I've just been able to figure out how to use it, but this is another option that particularly when looking for particular dates may be the way to go. So you just kind of get to see, so this is for what they have for the 1814 Cortland Repository, just to show what it looks like. I'm also not sure how well their search function works compared to Fulton. There may be some things that we have more success with on Fulton versus the Cortland Free Library page, or vice versa. And of course, that trick that I showed earlier, the file name contains Cortland trick, that does work for other newspaper names. So there are some Cincinnatus papers that should be available on Fulton, including Cincinnatus New York Times, Cincinnatus Review, and Cincinnatus New York Star. Now, the file name actually does have a misspelling. So if you are looking for Cincinnatus Star articles, you may have to purposefully misspell Cincinnatus. So here is a list of other newspaper names that should be available through Fulton History. This do include Homer, Marathon, and some McGraw papers. So in summary, once again, the most basic search, the most important thing that you can remember is to put names in quotes, and then add additional modifying terms to help narrow your search down. When using a Boolean search, same principle applies with putting names in quotes. This time you do have to add the term "and" in between any additional terms that you add. So name and Cortland and file name contains Cortland is a good way to narrow down your results to only Cortland papers. Also, just remember to try to think of any variation of names that you can think of. Include initials, don't include initials. Think of different spellings, abbreviations. William could be abbreviated to WM, things like that. But ultimately, the most important thing is to enjoy the process of discovery. You may go into it really hoping to find one specific thing, which can often mean that you end up not discovering other things because you're trying to narrow a search or things like that. So it may take time for you to find exactly what you're looking for, but that's kind of part of the fun. If you happen to still have any questions about how to use Fulton History, don't be afraid to reach out to us here at the Cortland County Historical Society.